Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura Frankie. I am the Sustainable Buildings Manager at Housing Development Consortium, and really pleased this afternoon to be joined by our presenters who will be sharing with us a newly launched decarbonization guide. We're calling this event Let's Get Ready to Decarbonize because we want you to all be that excited about decarbonization. So, because we are. So I will kick it over to the team. I'm going to share first that the Office of Sustainability and Environment at the City of Seattle has been a very important partner with HDC on this effort, and we were grateful to have their generous support in contracting with Elevate to do the work on this. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to Amy and let her talk to you about their work at OSE.
Great. Thanks so much, Laura. Well, it's great to see everybody here. Mary Jo is going to share her screen to let us get started on the presentation, but I just want to thank everyone for being here. It's been a long time coming to get this decarbonization readiness guide available for you. I was looking back at emails, and I think it was well, almost a year, maybe a little more than a year. The inkling of an idea with the decarbonization of Decarbonize Affordable Housing Now group got started on this. So happy to be able to bring it to you now. So we can go forward here. Always like to start our work with a land acknowledgement that the City of Seattle and King County and all the buildings within them, our homes and our workplaces, exist on the lands of the Coast Salish peoples and their descendants who continue to steward this land and surrounding waters. We share our respect and gratitude for the ongoing leadership of Native peoples throughout these lands and waters. Next slide. And as Laura mentioned, OSE provided support for this, but Housing Development Consortium led the charge with the Sustainable Buildings Initiative Task Force, and the members of that task force provided absolutely invaluable input for this guide. We managed the project and provided funding, but there's incredible case studies in this guide from Ecotope and O'Brien 360, and it couldn't have happened without Elevate Energy at the helm as our contractor. Next slide. So we're going to go through a few things here today. Why is the guide important? If you want to know your future, know your building. Talk about some decarbonization strategies that you really can do this. However, timing is almost everything. We'll talk a little bit why it's important to engage your residents, the important elements of your team, who should be on it, and that it really is the more the merrier, and that there is help available. So we'll kick off right now. So extra, read all about it. It is available now on the HDC website. I believe there was a link to it live in the registration site. If there isn't, the link is here, and we'll send these slides out afterwards to everyone who's registered. Next. So next, why is this guide important now? In a nutshell, you've got some newer regulations and some that have been around for a little while, affecting existing buildings, and there are deadlines now and in the future. We all know building upgrades take time, but decarb upgrades require some additional considerations, and then this guide will help you with that. And if you've already made some long-term plans about equipment replacements, you might want to take a second look after examining the impact of those regulations. So let's dive in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the energy codes, but there are three regulations that affect existing buildings. Of course, the energy code, I have Seattle Energy Code highlighted here, excuse me, as a representative of the City of Seattle, but there is the state energy code as well. The energy codes affect not just new construction, but also existing buildings. So they come into effect whenever an owner seeks a building permit for an equipment change within their building, for putting in a new boiler when an old one fails. For the next few minutes, I'm just going to focus on the two building performance standards that are at play in the City of Seattle and in Washington State. Seattle buildings have to comply with both, but if you're outside the City of Seattle, you are only needing to comply with the Washington standard. Next. So just a few examples showing the diversity of buildings that are covered by these two regulations. Excuse me, obviously we're interested today in the ones on the right, our multifamily buildings, but there's a lot of different buildings that are covered by these regulations across the state. Next. So let's take a quick step back, level set. What is a building performance standard? Um, a lot of states and cities across the country either have enacted one or planning to enact a building performance standard, but basically there are laws that require existing buildings to meet performance targets by specific deadlines. The targets can be measured as greenhouse gas emissions or as energy use. And to meet those targets, building owners need to reduce emissions from their buildings or decarbonize. So decarbonization is just another word for reducing emissions. And that's why we use the word decarbonization guide. You'll hear that word a lot today and in a lot of places. So next. So we'll start with the Building Emissions Performance Standard for the City of Seattle. BEPS is an emissions standard. So that means the targets owners are required to meet are based on greenhouse gas intensity, or GHGI. We do love our acronyms. And that measures the emissions of a building on a per square foot basis. This allows us to compare across buildings of different sizes, but it's on an intensity basis. So how do we calculate that? We take a look at the total annual energy use for each of the fuel types, and we multiply that by the emissions factor for that fuel type, add that up, and then we divide that by the square footage, excluding the parking, and we arrive at a greenhouse gas intensity, or the building's emissions per square foot. Each building has one, and then that is then compared to a target. Next. And those targets are going to get more stringent gradually over time, eventually leading to net zero. So here's the compliance timeline for BEPS. You'll see chunks of 4 initially, but then 5-year chunks going out to 2050. The buildings are grouped by size, and you will have the largest buildings having the earlier dates within those 5-year intervals. The smaller buildings will be at the latter end of each 5-year interval. And the city is offering technical and financial support, and we'll expand that support as we're able to, but I'll tell you more about that towards the end of the presentation. And at the bottom of this timeline here, you see something in gray. That's the Washington State timeline. We'll talk about that in a second. Next. So for a different way of looking at the BEPS deadlines, this is a grouping by building size. So this tells you can take a look down the left-hand column. What size is your building, or are your buildings if you have several of them? So then the next column is the first deadline, is about verifying the benchmarking that if you're building in Seattle, you've been doing this for 10 years. You've got verifying your benchmarking, and you're submitting a greenhouse gas report by October 1 of that year. And note that the 2 largest groups of buildings share a deadline of 2027. And then the next group down is 2028, 29, 2030. The right-hand column is the year that the first emissions targets come into play, and then the second emissions targets, the third, and the fourth. The later emissions targets are going to be built out through subsequent rulemaking. Next. So let's switch gears over to the Washington State Clean Buildings Performance Standard. We looked at Seattle BEPS, which was an emissions-based standard. So the Washington State Clean Buildings Performance Standard is an energy use based standard. And that means the targets building owners have to meet are based on energy use per square foot. So it allows for comparisons between buildings, again, on different sizes. It's how do we calculate that? Well, it's similar to the greenhouse gas intensity calculations, but we don't have emission factors here. What we do have to do is convert all of the different energy types that a building uses to a common unit. And in this case, it's kBTUs. So calculating EUI, we take the annual weather normalized use for all the different energy sources in a building, express that as kBTU, sum it up to determine the building's total energy use, and then divide that again by the building's total square footage, excluding parking, and we get its energy use intensity, or energy use per square foot. So note that multifamily buildings right now under the Washington State Clean Building Performance Standard aren't currently required to meet an energy use intensity target, although a voluntary one has been set. A regulatory target is likely to be defined in future rulemaking, so keep that in mind. Next. So what does the timeline look like for the Washington Clean Building Performance Standard? Even though you don't have an EUI target to meet, multifamily buildings still do have compliance obligations under the state standard. So multifamily buildings are termed Tier 2 buildings in the Washington CBPS, and they are on that timeline. The first deadline is actually less than a month away, July 1st of 2026, that middle brownish box. That's when owners will need to have completed their annual benchmarking. If you're outside the city of Seattle, you have not been doing it for 10 years, but if you're in the city of Seattle, you have been. They need to have developed an energy management plan and prepared an operations and maintenance plan. Let's look at those obligations just a little bit more closely on the next slide. So the first obligation is benchmarking. Again, if you're in Seattle, you've been doing this for a long time. Excuse me. And as part of that benchmarking, the building owner will be determining their EUI using the calculation method that I just outlined. The next obligation is preparing an operations and maintenance program. So documenting your best practices, making sure that you've got your entire inventory of all of the equipment in your building and your maintenance tasks. And then the last thing is an energy management plan. Are you annually updating your documentation, making sure that you have plans in place that there are all your practices and your building energy performance is documented. Next. So another reason this guide is important is things when you're trying to decarbonize your building, it doesn't happen quickly. If you are outside Seattle, you don't have a deadline to decarbonize your building yet, but you might have internal or corporate goals around decarbonizing your building, and that does take time. Let's look at some of the steps that might be involved in that. There's a lot more info in the guide, but upgrades related to decarbonizing a building have some front-end steps that ordinary upgrades might not. And whether you're meeting a regulatory target or just working to improve the habitability of your building during our increasingly hot summers, here in Seattle, by replacing gas furnaces with heat pumps that will offer air conditioning, protecting from heat, as well as our wildfire smoke that we get in the summertime sometimes. You're going to need to account for the time that these additional steps are going to take when you plan these projects. I'll talk a little bit more about that first bullet in a minute. Next. And the last reason is if you have done a long-range capital equipment plan, you may have made some choices in that plan about what types of equipment you're going to be installing as replacements. You want to avoid having to do multiple equipment replacements that are triggered by future regulatory deadlines. And you're going to want to align the plans that you've made with the newer codes that are in place. So for example, since 2021, the Seattle Code has required replacement equipment to meet energy efficiency criteria and to be non-fossil fuel based. So requiring replacing a gas boiler with a heat pump, for instance, with few exceptions, few exemptions. If your long-term capital improvement plan that you developed in, say, 2019, 2020 has a building's aging gas boilers being replaced with newer gas boilers out there in 2028, you're going to want to rethink that because that is not going to be a viable option out in 2028. Next slide. So we don't have crystal balls really to tell the future, but the effort of looking deep within your building is almost as good as having a crystal ball because it will help you foretell its compliance future. Next slide. Benchmarking is where it's at. It tells you the real inside story, and it's a critical element of understanding your building. Excuse me. As I mentioned, it's also a regulatory requirement for all existing buildings in Washington, and it's been a requirement in Seattle for quite some time. If you aren't already doing it as a building owner in Seattle, you're going to want to learn how to do that real fast for your July 1 deadline coming up. Both metrics, the building's greenhouse gas intensity and its energy use intensity, are going to give you key information that will help you plan the building decarbonization projects that you may be doing. If your greenhouse gas intensity is too high and you're in the city of Seattle, you're going to need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the building soon by eliminating fossil fuels, or at least begin planning for that reduction soon. If the energy use intensity is high, you're going to want to reduce the energy use from the building so that you make room within it for future electrification. Hopefully you can avoid upgrading the electric panel. You might not be able to, but if you can right size it now, that will help you in the future. Next. And then you want to try and develop an equipment list. That's part of the requirements for BEPS in its greenhouse gas report, and it's also a requirement in the CBPS for the operations and maintenance program. If you don't have an equipment list already, take a walk through your building. See what you've got there. Record your equipment type, make, model, size, year installed, etc. If you want to make it fun, build a scrapbook, challenge your tenants to a contest to find what's in their apartments and report it, etc. Find out what's in your building. Next. For a deeper dive, you're going to go with building audits. A much deeper dive into the building requires a consultant. They're going to evaluate all of your building systems beyond what's needed for BEPS and the CBPS, but they're going to give you crucial decision-making information for your decarb efforts. Next. So here's what this looks like kind of in a phased approach. All right, your preliminary walkthrough with your building representatives. You might survey your residents to get an understanding of any issues that they have, any indoor air quality or safety concerns. Then you dive in with your building, you're conducting an audit, and the outcome is a building assessment report from the consultant. It gives you all kinds of information and lays out options for any equipment upgrades, and might even identify potential funding sources to help you make decisions down the road. I'm going to flip it over to, I can't remember. I'm sorry, Mark, you got
It's
this one?
me. Yep.
Thank you, Mark. Go for it.
Thanks so much, Amy. And hello, everyone. My name is Mark Milby. I'm with the nonprofit Elevate. We authored this guide that I'm really excited to help present to you today with Amy and Mary Jo. So, Amy alluded to this throughout her presentation, but just want to reiterate that understanding your building inside out, this really is the foundation of everything. Before we can talk solutions, we really need a clear picture of what we're working with. And understanding your building in this way is more than benchmarking. It's this full understanding of every energy systems, your envelope, electrical capacity, health and safety conditions, tenant needs and considerations, and then projecting those future tenant or resident needs and considerations. What does that mean in terms of everything from the laundry machines to access and safety and things like that? Think of this, Amy referred to this already, but I want to hammer home, really think of this as aligning your capital needs assessment with decarbonization. They're no longer really parallel processes. They really need to be the same process. Um, Amy mentioned that even a requirement as far out as 2035 is a reason to bring these plans together now, because we are typically talking about major building systems with long lifetimes, long depreciation, and a long planning horizon to execute. So even some of the most basic projects, including pre-electrification work like electrical upgrades, can take a very long years kind of timeline. Um, and then Amy also mentioned this, but keep in mind that your residents are going to be a source of information for some of this. Not everything. You need that professional help. You need to go in depth and do that analysis and really understand, your building's energy usage in every which way. But residents often know where buildings aren't performing in terms of some things like comfort, like ventilation, like moisture, like safety. Those are things that tenants and residents experience and interact with every day. So in summary, the better your upfront assessment, the fewer surprises you'll see in design and cost and compliance down the road. Next slide. So now that I harped on that, the good news is that there is no single pathway that you must follow. The good news is there's multiple strategies that you can combine or even experiment with, especially across a portfolio of properties. But the key elements are to remember to keep the envelope first. You got to reduce heating cooling load before you electrify. This saves money and improves comfort in the long run. Specifically, it allows things like right sizing of future HVAC systems like heat pumps, and controlling heating and cooling loads is often the key factor in successful heat pump design and operation, and really seeing those cost savings or the bill impacts for the owner and for the tenants that you expect to see. And so, electrification of heating. Heat pumps are becoming the default replacement these days, especially as codes and the market evolves. My personal opinion is that I view where heat pumps are today in terms of market awareness and adoption, kind of where electric vehicles were like 10 years ago. Maybe there was awareness, but it wasn't super widespread or very deep. You might not have had a family member with one yet, but people were talking about them. And then there were plenty of hybrid solutions emerging to help people bridge into a fully electric future. Also, we should be thinking about solar or and renewable energy. And on-site solar may not always be feasible or cost-effective, but community solar can serve as this growing option. And also controls and smart energy management systems can also often be overlooked, but for many building operators and portfolio managers, they can be a source of relatively low-cost wins. And Amy touched on this, but again, you don't have to think about doing this all at once. This is a menu to consider and to plan for. Comprehensive upgrades take place over many years. And yes, there are sometimes great incentives or program resources that can allow you to pick off a major upgrade project that creates kind of a step change on that emissions reduction or energy reduction plan. But it's important to, at all times, zoom out and keep in mind that the majority of property owners are on a multi-year or even decadal timeline when it comes to making these types of upgrades. I've worked with many multifamily property owners that did weatherization, electrical upgrades, and cold climate heat pump upgrades over a 12 or 15-year time frame. And they consider that to be part of the same journey, and I think that's fair. Next, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Mary Jo, who's going to share more tips on this.
Hi, everybody. Mary Jo Warsko, also from Elevate. I am our Director of Community Consulting and was a contributor to the guide. And glad to have this opportunity to explore in depth the Seattle area and the surrounding area and get to know you so intimately because I'm in the Chicago area. But I'm going to talk about some of the more less technical aspects of decarbonization. So we have some high level tips, and these are all in the guide, but just emphasizing a few here for you today. The first is to fully understand the impact of the decarbonization strategies you pursue. You'll want to create a baseline projection of your financial and infrastructure outlook that assumes current equipment will be replaced with comparable equipment, so the gas situation at the end of its useful life. So this is just providing your what do you compare to get an idea of what your savings, your financial aspect will look like when you do go through with decarbonization. Secondly, decarbonization technologies and approaches are evolving rapidly. So for that reason, it's essential to explore innovative solutions. And that's both on the financial and the technical side. Things are changing monthly, actually. And so best to build in that innovation edge to what you're thinking through. Next, we've all experienced situations where things did not go according to plan. So therefore, it's crucial to consider contingencies for scenarios such as your equipment failing early or a new funding opportunity became available in a certain time period, or all of a sudden, certain pieces of equipment have changed in cost or availability. So building in flexibility for those contingencies is important. And your decarbonization plan may follow a linear timeline, but your planning process should not. You want to identify key points at which to reevaluate the plan and make updates based on lessons learned, emerging technologies and strategies, or changes in your circumstances. Our next set of tips is on the technical side. So while it may feel comfortable to work with the same contractors you have used in the past for your HVAC or electrical needs, partnering with a firm that understands the nuances of building decarbonization, its strategies, and the range of equipment options will give you the best chance for success. And as Amy noted earlier, state and energy codes include limits and requirements that could affect your selections. So become familiar with the details of the code that applies to your property in order to make the most informed decision. And then, oops, sorry, went ahead too quickly here. And then last, state and energy resources, our state and city resources are the best tools for confirming your approach and that it meets applicable requirements. If you're unsure if your strategy or equipment selections align with those standards, engage municipal staff early in the decision-making process to avoid delays or issues during implementation. So now we've moved on to people and process tips. Helping your new equipment and systems perform at their best will support your goals. To make that possible, provide facilities and maintenance staff with training they need and begin that effort early in the rollout. And after the staff has been trained, they and any advisors should establish clear, consistent protocols for maintaining the equipment over time. Some decarbonization measures can be carried out while residents remain in place, while others may require temporary relocation. This factor should be considered as you develop your plan and communicated to residents well in advance. And as you discuss your carbonization plan with residents, be sure to connect them with any relevant utility discounts, incentives, and rate programs available now before any work is completed and also after you have implemented decarbonization measures. So Amy introduced this in our agenda, but I love this saying that timing is almost everything. There are a lot of factors to consider, but timing is a very important factor. And one of the most helpful things that has already been mentioned a couple of times here is that you don't need to implement every decarbonization all at once. So instituting a phased approach that maybe addresses simpler, lower cost solutions first will then give you time to evaluate and prepare for the more complex, capital intensive strategies later on down the line. And when developing your timeline, consider the timing of a number of other key factors like current and future financing decisions, available funding opportunities, the remaining useful life of major equipment and systems, any planned or potential building renovations, and of course, identify the compliance milestones that will shape your schedule. Mark already mentioned this when he talked about surveying residents for the assessment, but we can't stress enough that it's important to engage with your residents early and often. Residents can play a significant role in the successful implementation of your plan and the result it achieves. Proactive, effective engagement can help ensure that the impact remains positive. This emphasis on engagement rather than simple communication is intentional. Residents should have meaningful opportunities to share input and participate in the process. As you involve them, frame discussions around their needs, and use language and communication tools that reflect diversity and equity. Provide information regularly and close the loop on the questions, requests, and feedback they share. And now I'm going to turn it back to Mark.
Thanks, Mary Jo. My team at Elevate is responsible for designing and implementing electrification programs, and I just can't emphasize enough the ongoing nature of the resident engagement, not just at the top, at the beginning of the process, like I mentioned, but then ensuring that they're ready for what's about to happen. Everything from changing a cooking system from gas to electric or induction, that's a big change, and supporting them in that, to understanding how to best operate a new heat pump system, right? We see a lot of issues where heat pumps don't perform well because of the way that they're operated, like it was an old gas furnace or something like that, with big swings and set points, for example. And then everything to, filter maintenance and just really understanding that. So important. So next I want to talk about just more practical advice here. Something that you can begin today is building your team. The more the merrier, and that is because no one can deliver building decarbonization alone. This really is a team sport, and please don't try to don't think that this is something that you as an organization have to do alone. internal alignment, I can't overemphasize enough that internal alignment is a key first step, meaning owner plus asset management plus property management plus maintenance have to be aligned on the vision for what this plan is going to be. And maintenance staff, in my experience in particular, are critical. If systems are not operable long term, then performance of those systems won't stick. You need maintenance staff to be advocates, proactive advocates for these new systems. As Mary Jo mentioned on the previous slide, also think early and proactively about resident engagement. What will that cost? Who will lead it? What does it mean to be responsive to feedback on some of these new systems or the designs that you're planning? And then think externally. Like Amy mentioned, bring in experienced consultants and contractors early. Don't wait until designs are already underway or there's already a lot percolating. Engage them early. Of course, your lender, your investor, your housing finance partner should be part of this conversation from the beginning. And I'm assuming many of you already have these players or are some of these players. But this is just about reminding you that when it comes to a journey as big and as complex as building decarbonization, engaging earlier and more intentionally will be key. Seeing that the right people are at the table will mean that there's fewer costly pivots later. Next slide. So this slide just kind of pulls it together. A lot of the concepts that we have touched on throughout this presentation. This is your high-level roadmap. It's a practical sequence, and it's as follows. One, define your targets, meaning understand both compliance and organizational goals. Understand your building in the ways that we talked about. Next, identify important timing windows. So these could be like capital timing needs, equipment replacement timelines, program or incentive windows, financing windows, resident turnover, things like that. It may be more prudent to jump on an earlier equipment replacement timeline if that is when program dollars are available to participate in, even though that's not a common practice that we would see in the status quo. Evaluate building specific constraints, and again, really understanding your building. So add in supporting strategies, health and safety remediations, energy efficiency, on top of electrification, on top of renewables. Build that financial plan. Evaluate feasibility with all your key internal and external stakeholders. Create a realistic implementation timeline, and then prepare and begin to execute on a plan to educate staff and residents. But of course, preferably that education starts all the way back way earlier with proactive leadership involvement. And again, just want to reiterate one thing. This should integrate with your asset management and your capital planning. This is not a separate decarbonization strategy. They really have to be unified. And this is also not a one and done kind of thing. You should expect to revisit and refine this plan because, and Mary Jo mentioned this, funding, technologies, policies, they're all going to evolve. I mean, every year there's like a new heat pump product with different performance or better performance, for example. Programs are changing and funding levels change, that environment landscape changing all the time. So expect for this to evolve over time. Equipment pricing, that's another one that is always changing in my world. But a good plan reduces risks, unlocks funding, and makes compliance achievable. Next slide. I'm going to pass it back to Amy to close us out.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. So we've thrown a lot at you today, trying to give you a high-level view of the guide, but there's so much more inside it. And it might feel like, oh God, there's so much I have to do. Well, there's more help. There's more help if you need it. Next slide. There are grant opportunities. Here's a list of a few. OSC just opened its competitive grants for Seattle buildings, the Building Decarbonization Grant Program, launched May 20th for 2026 awards. It closes in August 10th. There are links there, but there's links available on the OSC website. There's also the King County Energize program. That is not a grant program per se. That is a program operated by King County and their contracted providers and provides building upgrades as well as planning for the building and compliance planning. And then Puget Sound Energy has a residential, excuse me, residential building decarbonization program. It closed already for this year. It was over the winter, December to January, but we expect that they will offer funding again. So watch that website for announcements for new funding opportunities. And the photos there show a couple of the buildings that OSE has funded in the past for decarbonization projects. Next. And if you're feeling like you need somebody to help you, help hold your hand, or you've got questions you need answers to about compliance with these different regulations, OSE has a program that provides coaching, group training and coaching for building owners and operators in Seattle, the Building Emissions Navigator program. We actually have an info session next week on the 11th. So you can register for that and learn more about the Building Emissions Navigator program. We have a coaching cohort that will kick off in September. It's a virtual cohort. PSE also has a Clean Buildings Accelerator virtual program. They have that's available to multifamily building owners as well. The Washington Department of Commerce has a website that has online resources as well as a help desk ticket system. They have quite a lot of information available there. And then the Smart Building Center is a great resource. They have lots of online resources as well as the ability to provide office hours to answer your questions. So finally, on our last slide here, just some links here that will be in the slides for you. Learn more about HDC on their website. Download that guide. You can learn more about BEPS on the Seattle Office of Sustainability's website, and learn more about what all the great stuff that Elevate does on their website. Now we'd be happy to answer questions. I see a few came into the chat.
Yeah, I think we can start off with the one on the chat from Jennifer. Does the city have a template for the GHG decarb plan? I see a narrative in the regulations about requirements and saw an example in the guide, but a similar template to the state's EMP template would be helpful to understand the minimum requirements of what the city wants to see.
It's a great question, Jennifer. We're developing the online portal that will be used for submitting the greenhouse gas plan. So it won't be here's what you have to put in it. It will be an interactive portal that will get developed, and you'll be able to submit information via that portal. All of the components are listed in the plan of the plan are listed in the regulation. But I'm looking to see if someone from my office here who could go into more detail is here, but no. No, all of the information that you need will be in the portal itself.
Great. David has a question. Can community solar production be accounted for in BEPS or CBPS compliance? I think I saw that suggestion as a measure to consider in achieving compliance.
I can answer that for BEPS. Solar is not included as a compliance measure for building emissions performance standard because it's an electric source. We are looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the building, so we don't include solar as a measure to reduce emissions.
And I don't know if there's anybody on the call from the state that is available to answer that. I don't recognize any self-identification as being with Commerce.
Yeah, I don't see anybody either.
We can take that up with Commerce directly on the Clean Building Performance Standard piece. Other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and so you don't have to type it out too. We're in the discussion phase of our meeting now. Don't be shy. A lot of information here.
You gotta want to know more.
Mary Jo, what should people be asking that we haven't thought of yet?
I'm going to turn it to Mark because he
I
does these projects. So I think he knows what
well,
questions
I was
the
just going to say,
audience
I think the
comes up
guide
with.
has a number of interesting case studies that are worth reviewing, because those also provide, real world examples and people that are probably part of, the group, um, that could provide insight. And there's some useful practical strategies that are included in that, like how before things to do before developing permit plans and ways to engage with external partners and things like that that are, I think, just good tips and tricks.
Ellie, I'm going to let you read your own comment here, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. No problem. I'm curious for anyone on the call who is more from the owner operator side of multifamily buildings. What are your current pain points? I know more from the programmatic or implementation side, we see all these funding opportunities and these technical resources and, assistance from planning all the way to implementation. But we know there's still not as much movement as could happen or should happen. So I'm curious from your perspectives, like what other bottlenecks or pain points are you experiencing that you do need help with that could put you on this path and yeah, make progress faster, better, stronger.
We'll refrain from calling on people directly, but would love to get some feedback on that. This is one of the problems that we are trying to solve for, honestly, with our Dawn group is, how can we facilitate connectivity between the resources and identify where you're getting stuck in your process. David.
Yeah. So one thing that we're kind of seeing on different projects is that there are grants available, but the grants are, when certain work is done on these buildings, there's oftentimes a desire on the owner's side to tick off all the other things that need to be done in those units, right? You're mobilizing a team to do a fair amount of work. You're going into apartments. You may have to displace them for a time period, or if you're not, you want to minimize the impact by getting it all done at the same time. And that might include non-decarbonization measures that that there may be other funding for, but kind of piecing together all the funding to make those projects work, it does add some challenges. And I think so just the ability to have more flexibility on what is considered decarbonization, bringing load reduction measures and indoor air quality measures into the umbrella of the important things that need to be addressed in these projects, it would be, I think, what it would be great to see.
That's great. Thank you. Others with thoughts on this from the owner operator side?
Laura, I'm not an owner operator, but Elevate, we engage with owner operators. And so I do see some of the challenges and frustrations that they face. And I just want to echo some of what David mentioned. Stacking or braiding different funding sources or incentives tends to be a real point of frustration, and it helps to have some kind of program or intermediary like that's kind of one-stop shopping that for you. But in particular, different incentives or funding sources might have different rules or different timelines, and it can be tricky to sort of align a project within all the different parameters and timelines of that. Similarly, like a lot of the paperwork and approval process around income eligibility and verification, if that is something that's part of a program that you're pursuing, that can be really challenging, particularly with tenant turnover. I have a building I'm working with right now in the Midwest that is like going in and out of eligibility as tenants turn over, and it's been a really frustrating experience for them to try to get into a program. I think getting support in educating residents, right? If there are local programs or nonprofits or organizations that can help you with that, that is another frustration that I see, or just not really being sure, how am I supposed to really do this? How are we supposed to do this? Putting a plan in place for educating residents as they turn over. And then the last one is measuring and understanding post retrofit performance. It may be something to consider, to engage the design build team or an analyst or assessment firm on a longer term basis to kind of get their help in understanding what is the post retrofit impacts that you're seeing. Are our bills going down? Are tenants experience bill savings? Are these systems performing? That's something that I don't typically see built in, but is a common question that owners and operators have, and there's not a ton of support, in most jurisdictions for that.
I know during our recent summit, we had folks identify that some of this equipment is much more advanced and requires a lot different technical skill set for maintenance than perhaps the older equipment did. How are your projects that you're currently working on coming up to speed on the maintenance side of it? Are you engaging with the manufacturers, or what sort of support is being provided for that aspect?
Yes, it kind of goes back to the need to have maintenance staff really bought in and engaged early on. It does help to have manufacturers at the table, as they often can provide training or at least resources on this. Now our water heaters have filters in them. Um, our heat pump dryers have two filters in them. So things like that the technology is changing, maintenance schedules and routines are different. If ductless heat pumps, for example, that's an equipment that requires a different cleaning regimen. So having the maintenance staff bought in, and then having that maintenance plan sort of known and budgeted for in advance, I think is a real key to success and can help avoid surprises. Unfortunately, I don't see a lot of programs in the country right now that sort of focus on that post retrofit, the ongoing, maintenance support. It's a lot of funding for projects themselves, but I think it's important to kind of build that into, your operating plans and budgeting up front and take it all into consideration.
Thank you.
Amy, can you walk through the timeline requirements again, like the BEPS timeline again, and what the accommodations are for the affordable housing community? Kind of,
Sure.
because my read of it is I felt like I had to look at it a couple times. It's like if you have a smaller building, you'll be on this timeline, and a larger building on this timeline. And then talk about again, I thought I like the question about like post work. Is this going to be a performance requirement or a prescriptive requirement? How is the requirement met specifically? And then if a building, I could just see again a building either not being able to meet the timing requirement, or physically, structurally not
Go back
being
one more.
able to do the improvements that are needed. So what happens then with owners if they can't meet the requirements?
Yeah, let's go back one more slide. All right. So we look here, the first targets start in 2031. And the multifamily emissions targets is that second dark blue bar that starts in 2031. And there's a little asterisk there. There's an extension for low income, low rent housing and human services. You can defer meeting the 2031 target and instead start with meeting the 2036 target. So you are buying more time. You are skipping that first target, but you have to start meeting targets with 2036 with the 2036 target. Okay. You aren't pushing your targets back. You're pushing the date back at which you need to meet a target. You still have to do the benchmarking verification every 5 years. You still have to do your greenhouse gas report every 5 years, et cetera. But it gives you more time to move to that target. Does that answer the question around multifamily?
But then it's by like different building sizes are
Exactly.
different years within that 5-year
Exactly.
period, right?
Within
So
that interval. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Thank you. So here by building size with that 2036, 2037, 38, 39, 40, that's that interval. You can defer the first target, the 31 through 35, and instead meet the second target, 2036, 37, 38, 39, 40, depending on your size. Yes. So the second part of your question was around how do you do it? Or what happens if you can't?
Yeah, so how does a building know that it's met the standard? So there's an audit process, you set up a scope of work, you do the work. How do you know then that you're thumbs up, good to go?
That's where the verifying benchmarking comes in.
Yeah,
So
okay.
you've been benchmarking your building in Seattle for 10 years, but there's never been a component where someone independently verifies your data and takes a look at your equipment list and make sure that you have captured all of your equipment and all of its energy use into the benchmarking report. That everything's included, everything's up to date. So that component is up front, the verifying to make sure that you have a complete data set going in is the first step in compliance. When you start trying to meet your target, the target is calculated based on the usage type within the building. So for multifamily, if it's all multifamily, that's one use type. But if you've got some ground floor retail and then you've got multifamily above that, then that's a mixed use type and that gets prorated based on the square footage of each of those use types to generate your divided, your prorated target. The verification, excuse me, of the benchmarking will verify what was your GHGI versus the calculated GHGIT, and how do those two compare? Have you met it or not? So it's within that verified benchmarking report that determines you've got verified benchmarking data and a verified target based on what the building has within it. How did you do?
So it's not modeled.
No,
It's
it is
not,
not.
yeah.
It's not modeled. There's no
You'll
model.
undertake the work based on modeling, but then you won't really know until you do the work and benchmark it.
Well, there isn't modeling that's required up front either.
Okay. But just saying
except that you might do modeling in terms of what solutions do you want to implement? Yeah,
right.
absolutely. You might do modeling as part of that. Yes.
Yeah.
But in terms of actual within the regulatory, requirements of BEPS, modeling is not required. Now, for multifamily housing, there are a couple of prescriptive options. So you could say, the way I'm going to meet this target is instead of doing my calculations, what's my GHGI versus my target, I am going to replace every single gas boiler in my building with a heat pump boiler. And you can do that for one target. And that's a one and done. That I did that work, and we're going to call that meeting the target that time. Or you could replace all of the gas furnaces with heat pumps for one target. You can do that one time. And then you have multiple targets to meet, so you could do one time and one another time. That could be how you meet two targets. Even if your overall number doesn't meet the target per se, you have met the compliance objective by doing that.
Jenna, I see your question. Did that explanation cover what you were asking, or do you want to rephrase or clarify it in any way? I'll let you just come off mute if you're available to.
Jenna, did I answer the question?
Guessing she's not available to come. She's not able to come off mute. Jenna, if you want to come in and get additional clarification, feel free to jump in. We'll go over to Dave.
David's
Ready?
hand, yeah.
I guess it may not be critical to multifamily in general, but one of the challenges with benchmarking as it primarily exists today is you can get whole building aggregated data. But if you have multiple commercial, if it happens to be a building with commercial tenants, or even just, you have a lot of different apartments and you don't know where the energy is going, like, but yet you're responsible for meeting this target. Um, Now I understand there's ways to mitigate that, getting utility releases in place and all that, but I think it would be really helpful if there was a movement towards data transparency to make that much more, the data more accessible, so people can actually make informed decisions on like where the energy is going and help meet these targets.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Knowledge is power. You got to know. You got to know what's in the building, as we said, and where it's going. Yeah, I hear you.
All right, well, we're coming up to 12:57. Any final thoughts or questions?
So Amy, again, I think this isn't the resources with the city, but just the last part of my question was like, what if there's a building that can't meet the standard, either like the work just can't be done because of the type of the building, or the work is too cost prohibitive, or the owner does the work and doesn't hit the standard. So what are like some of the sort of accommodations that
So there's flexibility within BEPS by design. That's what made it such a complex rule to write. The law is complicated, and flexible, so the rule is complicated. But there are three different compliance pathways. The first is just meet that target. The second has some variability and some exemptions and some exceptions, and the third is a very customized approach. And so buildings that have, an historic building, for example, or buildings that have done everything that they can and they just can't get there, for example, that there's ways within that third pathway that you work with OSC, you work with us and develop a plan, and maybe it's you're going to get to X% over the course of time and do the best that you can to get to there. You develop a plan. And if it's been approved by OSC, then you're going to go for that plan. We tried to have as much of a flexibility as possible. The goal is to decarbonize buildings and get to net zero. There are likely buildings out there where that will be physically impossible because there isn't capacity within the building to take out a 100-year-old boiler for throwing an insane number out there and put in a heat pump that would take up more space than the building has. Right? You can't build a new building within your building, So then we talk about what could you do? What's the most that you could do? Reasonably available technology, that kind of stuff.
Great.
And we're at
Well,
1 o'clock and people have to go to
We're
other
at 1
meetings.
o'clock. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and call it. Thank you all so much for sticking with us, and thank you to our presentation team. This is really valuable information, and I know that folks will appreciate having the slide deck along with the recording to refer back to early and often, as was said many times throughout the presentation. So thank you all for your time today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.